Hey everybody, welcome to Connecting Cannabis. I brought to you by Wrazel. I'm your host, Brian Haller. I hope everybody's doing well and enjoying themselves this week. Today on the show, we have Philip Rebentisch of Got a Story. He's here to talk to us about the importance of storytelling in your content and even your educational, informational content, and kind of how to go about doing that. So we're really looking forward to that. But first, of course, I have to talk to you about Apricot Analytics. Apricot Analytics is a full-service product quality lab for cannabis testing and CBD hemp testing. They have over a decade of analytical lab experience and have been working with cannabis products since 2005. Apricot Analytics understands the needs of cannabis and hemp producers because they were producers themselves. They know the challenges and the frustrations of dreams of cultivators and manufacturers. They get it because they've been here and they're here to help. Apricot Analytics tests your products for the good stuff like THC and CBD concentrations and helps you identify any bad stuff like pesticides, mold, bacteria, and heavy metals. For more information, go to apricotanalytics.com, or to learn more about their current investment opportunity, go to the Wrazel Investment Marketplace at wrazel.com. All right, let's bring in Mr. Rebentisch. Sir, how are you today?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
You know, hanging in there. It's I'm admiring your backdrop, actually. It's very nice.
Thank you.
Of course. What is that from, actually? Might as well start there. What's your backdrop
It's
from?
my living room. It is. It's my living room. Okay, there's only 10 people. It's okay. I know they're all social distanced.
But it doesn't look like 10.
Actually, it's an event that I shot before we were all locked down. And it was a really fun event called WeedCon, and I just really like that picture because it reminds us of what things used to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's dive right in. So Got a Story, which I think is a very logical name and very cool, appropriate name for a storyteller. So how did you become chief storyteller of Got a Story?
So I've been in media for a long time, and I've been blessed to have different and a variety of work. I've done entertainment. I started my career doing educational television for NASA, which was incredible. Spent some more time in aerospace, and so I've always been on the TV side of things, primarily as a writer, then as a producer and a director. So for a long time, I've been interested in storytelling. I launched Got a Story Media in January of 2018. I had spent about 10 years working at a law firm whose clients were advertising agencies. Oh. And so I'd been out of the creative space for a while. I was working on the legal side, trying to keep agencies out of copyright and trademark trouble for national advertising campaigns. It's a great gig, really enjoyed it. But then those yearnings of wanting to create content again and not just review it for the legal side or legal issues, I decided I wanted to get back in the content game. So in January of 2018, I launched Got a Story, and I couldn't believe it because I'd been saying, hey, got a story, let me tell it, is just kind of a branding thing.
Right.
For myself personally. And I thought, well, I wonder if that domain's available. And it was.
See, that's
right?
Amazing, right?
So
Here. Like
I ran.
Like
I was
2
up.
years ago.
I know, and I'm like, wait. So I ran downstairs to tell my wife. I said, "Hey, this domain is available. Do you think I should get it?" Right? And she's, giving me good advice. She's like, "Why haven't you already?"
Yeah.
So
why are you bothering your time asking me?
Yeah, exactly. So I locked it up. And when I started, I always knew, Brian, that cannabis was going to be part of it. I just didn't know to what degree, but I always knew I would be involved in somehow. And then in May of 2018, I attended a Digital Hollywood conference. And unbeknownst to me, there was a cannabis track. And so one of those speakers was Tracy Ryan. And I walked out of there with a new mission in life. She was so moving in her story of her daughter, Sophie, and the creation of the company. Just completely resonated with me. And I literally did walk out of there with a new mission. And ever since then, all I've been doing is creating cannabis content exclusively for the cannabis community.
Very, very cool. And no surprise, Tracy's very motivating and very inspirational. She'll, in fact, a cheap plug, she'll be on the show later this week. So I'm very excited to have her on the show.
That is not a cheap plug.
But ultimately, that's great because I could understand why that would inspire you so much, and how I met you is that you were at conference, and I think we were at Canafarm Con, I want to say a year ago about now.
It was.
And, and we just hit it off right away because, you tell stories, I'm marketing and biz dev. So, and Wrazel's helping lots of clients. So it just was kind of a natural fit. I want to hear your thoughts on, the importance of storytelling for kind of a general, in a general way.
Yeah.
I don't think people somehow, I think everybody gets, oh, I should tell a story instead of just showing this information. But there's a lot more to it, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And a lot of it is knowing who you're creating that content for. So I'm in my 50s, right? And I pretty much create content for that age group. 40 and above is really the audience that I'm trying to speak to.
Right.
One, because I know it, right?
Sure.
I'm not a millennial. I once wrote a piece about whether I'm a boomer or an Xer. And I decided at the time I'm just a person, right?
Nice, sure.
But you got to know your audience, right?
Definitely.
And the whole thing about my age group is that as long as I've been around, cannabis has been stigmatized. It was devil weed, right? It was a gateway drug. Just say no, all of that. So for the people within my age group, we have to educate them as to the medicinal side of cannabis. That's where I really come in, is what can this do to make you feel better, make you live better, health and wellness, because it is a medicine. I mean, yes, you can use it for adult use, and that's fine, that's great. You're still getting the medical benefits of that.
Yep.
So what I try to do within it is, and we met at events, and that's one of the things that I do is cover events to kind of tell that story before the event and then after the event, what was that about, and explain what it was about. And not so much a journalist. Like people ask me all the time, well, are you a reporter? Are you a journalist? No, that's a different mindset. It's a different tone than being a content creator or an educator, where you're trying to explain not just the why and the how, but how does it really benefit that end user, that cannabis consumer, whether that person is a patient or just, again, adult use. But it's just a different tone. And I try to be very clear about that no, I'm not a reporter. I'm not doing something for Forbes. I mean, I do, create content for investment, things along those lines, right?
Sure.
That's great. But it's still the tone of what you're talking about. And I always think that's really important. If you want to have a Forbes piece, great. I like to compare it to More People magazine, right? Where it's just a different mindset, or maybe Home and Garden. It's just a different mindset of how you're trying
something
to
more
communicate.
personal.
Yeah. And here's a really good example of that. So for one of my clients, I was asked to create content describing the difference between hemp and traditional cannabis. And I'm like, okay. So I came up with an idea of using the dancer Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. So Fred Astaire, a little bit more, finesse, a little lighter on his feet. I chose him to be traditional cannabis. And Gene Kelly, a little bit more versatile, stronger guy, was hemp. Nice. And where else can I make jokes like that, Brian, except for someone that's over 50? Mean,
you're hitting your audience right in the wheelhouse,
Thank you.
I'm right on the young end of that. Fortunately, I do know who Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire are, but yes, that joke or that connection would not resonated nearly as much with me as it would have somebody that's, probably 50, 60.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So that's one reason why, I feel comfortable. And again, you write what you know and write who you're comfortable for. And there's so many other talented writers out there that are covering the, younger demographics that, yes, I can do that. But my preference is to obviously talk with people who are my age, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And older.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you said, know your audience, which is that first step, right? Okay, well, if I'm really writing for this, that's, I think, a big mistake that people, even like marketers or people who do create a lot of content, whether it's for their business or whatever, they feel like their audience is here.
Yeah.
It's probably here.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out what this here is. It's not necessarily age-based all the time. It could be, consumers or, people who like to smoke versus edibles or whatever. But, you got to find that niche and really just drive it home, which is exactly what you're sort of leading into, which is know the language also of the audience that you finally figure out that you should cater to, right? Hence the Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire reference, right? So,
exactly.
The equivalent for somebody my age, I don't know, might be like, comparing J-Lo and Beyonce's dancing styles. Or
there you go.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really not just about the audience; it's about knowing the language. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Well, it's about education, right?
Sure.
So I used cannabis as a young man, right, in high school. And I like to tell the story that chief storyteller, that I've been a professional writer since age 17, because back in high school, I used to write stories for my friends in creative writing class because I loved it.
Right.
And they would pay me in joints. Right. So yes, professional writer since I was the age of 17.
That's
right.
Getting paid. That's right.
And so one day the English teacher, said, Philip, I need to speak to you after class. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is not good. This could be really bad. And all she said to me was, Philip, you need to stop writing stories for your friends. I know they're yours. You just need to stop. I'm like, okay, great. No problem. Right. So through college, yes, I used cannabis a little bit, but then for like 10 years when I was raising my kids, I really got away from it. Sure. I enjoyed cigars for a little while there. But I had really gotten away from it. So when I came back to using cannabis, and I got my medical recommendation, I wanted to find something that was going to help me sleep better, cut back on alcohol. And that's really why I decided to get my medical recommendation. And Brian, when I got back into the world, I did some research for my first trip to the dispensary. Being a writer, you have to be able to do research, right?
Of course. Yeah.
So did my research, thought I knew what I was doing, walked into that dispensary and was completely intimidated, right?
Oh, sure.
Walked out with something that was not quite right, shall we say, for what I was looking for. And I thought, wait a minute, if I'm having that experience, someone that can do research, that thought he knew what he was doing when he walked in there, there's a lot of other people out there that are going through that same experience. And that led directly to me creating my podcast, which is called Cannabis for the Rest of Us.
That's right.
And the whole idea of that was for me to go interview people that I wanted to learn from so that I could share that with other people. Yep. So again, you're listening and you're talking to people and getting educated, but how are you presenting that to people? What kind of formats are you using? And I wanted to use a half-hour podcast because you can do that anywhere, right? You don't necessarily have to be tied to a computer, right? And that's how Cannabis for the Rest of Us was launched. But again, that's part of the overall educating people about this plant and everything around it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's twofold. One, it breaks the stigma, as you referred to earlier, but it's also just needed. It can be a very intimidating, this whole, the whole culture, the whole knowledge, the whole everything. And you see people with all this confidence in it, and you're just like, I don't know. I've had all this messaging my whole life, and I don't know, what it is. It's super important, I think, to have someone that's available to kind of guide you in some way or another, right? Like part of the reason Wrazel exists as a source is because so many people are trying to look into the business side of cannabis now, right?
Yeah, sure.
So we have a website where even if you're looking for, whether you're looking for investment opportunity or raising capital for your own company, or if you're just looking to connect with other people in business or learn more about a particular niche. Yeah. Our site is good for you, right? A podcast like Cannabis for the Rest of Us, or even, dare I say, Connect in Cannabis. These are good forums for us to be able to have two professionals out here talking about, the business like it's a business,
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of, maybe, doing a disservice by kind of making it a little bit, too entertaining. You want to make it for your audience. You want to make it entertaining, obviously, I guess, but you don't need to do all the bells and whistles because people really want to hear the conversation.
And, Brian, what that gets back to is normalizing it, right?
Sure.
What we're trying to do is make this seem normal. Yep. And when MedMen, came out a few years ago, they had a campaign of coach, teacher, athlete, that kind of thing, lawyer.
That's right.
And I agreed with that campaign. I was saying, hey, wait a minute. It's not, and again, we're fighting that stereotype of the stoner, right?
Yeah.
Because again, that's the kind of messaging that we were put forth to us for years.
Yes.
Was, you're a loser. You're not a productive member of society if you're using cannabis. And so again, any way we can normalize it, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I know from my own personal experience, like you, I had people around me who used it that didn't fit that stereotype. So it always kind of was, well, I get it. Yeah, I've met these folks that are, that are this, or I like to consume myself. So, when I was a younger kid, you maybe could have even pointed at me and went like, hey, look at that guy, right? But ultimately, I just knew too many people who were too smart, too driven, too successful already, and it wasn't hurting their progress. In fact, if anything, it was helping. And so that can only, the more people that can learn that way, because just like everybody, I mean, you got to get close. You got to almost touch it if you can. Because if you can, then it's real to you, right? Hence the reason why we're doing this in a way. Listen to us. We're talking to you right now. You don't have to take anecdotal evidence beyond just our stories we're telling, but it is Brian Holler, Philip. You can vet us. You can look at what we've done, and you can see that, these are two guys who, yes, they work in cannabis, but they're also professionals who've done a lot of things. And I agree with you. Like, that's a huge part of breaking the stigma.
Yeah. And there's so many different elements to it. You have edibles, you have distillates, you have beverages, you have tinctures, and then, typical flower. My whole thing is I vape flower. Natural. I have a small vape that was created so you could, grind a flower and then smoking flower. And that's what I do. As a former asthmatic, smoking doesn't agree with me anymore. It's just not something I'm really interested in. It's not a good thing for me.
Makes sense.
But vaping it, so I had to have a whole learning curve with that and try to figure it out. And so any way that you can help people learn about, how fine should I grind that? Oh, can I eat the cannabis after vaping it? Which is something I started doing. And I'm of German descent, right? So I like things that are like, dark chocolate. I like dark beer. I like, strong black coffee.
Sure.
And when the first time I ate the cannabis that I'd combusted in the vape, it reminded me of popcorn seeds, at the bottom of when you make popcorn at home.
That's a good call. Yeah.
Some people really like that kind of burnt taste kind of a thing. I do.
Right.
And so what's happened is, yes, I enjoy the vaping element, but when I eat that decarboxylated cannabis, that is now keeping me to sleep. And I swear to God, Brian, I am out at 11 o'clock and I wake up without an alarm clock now pretty consistently at 6:37, right? Yeah. Between that frame, without really needing an alarm clock because I'm sleeping so well now. So for me, it's working.
Yeah, I can echo those sentiments in terms of sleep. I've tried a variety of different, products, but generally if I take like a little, tincture, a drop of, CBD from, most reputable companies that I've dealt with, it really helps. Yeah. I barely need an alarm anymore myself, which is amazing to me, and, these are just, again, it goes back to telling stories, right?
Yeah.
These are stories, right? Would I rather hear, a first-person narrative about somebody who really had sleep difficulty and how, CBD or THC or some, vaping or some sort of aspect of it helped them? Or do I want to hear kind of a whole, 30-minute spiel about the product itself? Well, I might want that story.
Yeah, exactly. And back it up with science.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
That's what I've tried to do is, when I typically write a piece, It's anywhere from 800 to 1,200 words, sometimes a little bit more than that.
Sure.
But that's, a fairly standard range for, creating some content.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think it's really important that you link to sources that are credible,
yes.
Wherever that may be, whether it's a scientific paper. People think, there's no research done on cannabis.
Oh.
Yes, we need more in this country, obviously, but there is still tons of research out there that you can use. Some of it's, published here in America.
Right.
So whenever possible, if you can give it that credibility, that authenticity of, hey, this is real while you're telling that story, hey, that's a perfect 1-2 punch in terms of content, right?
Yep. It's entertaining and it's, fact-based. So if people are like, yeah, that's a nice story, but you're like, oh, excuse me, source.
Yeah, exactly. Put links in.
Exactly. Right. And, and I just, it's, this is good advice for anybody. Like it doesn't matter what kind of cannabis company, it doesn't matter what kind of company you have, you are now charged with creating content, which is maybe something you're still wrapping your head around, but as a business owner. But the truth of the matter is the easiest way for you to convey messages and to sell your products and services is to put out some information, for lack of a better term, right? And yes, if depending on what your business is, you might have to lean harder into the science and education kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But it all comes down to telling a story, like you're saying. Doesn't matter how hard you got to lean. Even in a study, an academic study, there are storytelling elements. Yeah,
exactly. And so, I mentioned earlier that I started my career at NASA, right? Doing educational TV. Okay. So I did that. And then after that, I worked for Rocketdyne, which created the space shuttles engines, right? And my job was to take what scientists and engineers were telling me and translate that into understandable content to convince Congress people to keep funding the program. Right? Yeah. So again, you've got that technical side of it, but if you're not making it interesting, okay, if you're trying to convince someone to do something, well, that's marketing, my friend. So what do you need to do to get that done?
That's right. You got to translate the into boom, effective messaging. That's something you and I share is the ability to take, this kind of information, and put it into consolidated, layman's terms that that anybody from any walk should relatively be able to understand, or at least certainly, if this many people in your audience understand it, you want this many too, because you're creating kind of a funnel of information designed to bring attention to your company, generate leads, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And being in, I write a lot about being in the cannabis community bubble here in California.
Sure.
Because it is fairly easy here. Yes, things need to be improved and we can talk about that. But it's really easy to get caught up in that bubble where you just assume, well, everybody agrees, everybody's on board. But even in 2019, Gallup did a poll in October of 2019 that showed 66% of Americans favor legalization. Hey, that's a great number, but it's only 66%.
Yep.
Right. So what do we need to do to increase that, to keep that number, going up? I mean, when Prop 215 passed in California, the first medical cannabis legislation in the country, I've got some stats on that. It was by an 11-point margin. It was 55% yes, 44% no. 44% is still a pretty high number in California, right? So people think that, everything's legal. What do we have to do to keep, access available to people? We still have a long way to go. And I've got some other numbers like Cannareg's data, which is a company that helps companies comply with regulations, things along those lines.
Yes.
In February of 2019, they put out some data that said only 161 of California's 482 municipalities enacted cannabis legislation for businesses of any type.
Right.
And only 24 of 58 counties allow it.
That's right.
So again, it's really easy to get caught up where we think, it's available everywhere in California. Even in California, that's not true.
Yep.
And that's one reason I got involved with LA NORML, right? To help reach out to communities to say, this is why it's important. And this is why advocacy is still important for the consumer.
Yep, and yeah, that's a great segue. You stole it from me, Philip. But yes, Philip's the director of community outreach for LA NORML, which has kind of just gotten, let's call it a freshened up again, kind of a new start, basically, and hence the advocacy portion of kind of what Philip does, which is so imperative to kind of your overall, I don't know, for lack of a better term, brand.
Yeah. Well, LA NORML has been around since 1973, and it was run by Bruce Margolin, who is an OG, a legend, cannabis defense attorney.
Absolutely.
And so since 1973, LA NORML was Bruce.
Yeah.
And we decided, Ian Rassman came on board, who's the deputy director, and he approached me in December of 2019 about coming on board as director of community outreach to grow the chapter. Sure. I mean, Bruce had done such an amazing job. I mean, you think National NORML was formed in 1970. Bruce started LA NORML in 1973. The longevity and the history of that is just incredible.
It is.
But we wanted to take it and form a company and bring on a new board of directors. We came up with a new tagline called The New Normal.
I love it.
Just saying.
Yes.
And the whole idea is to be a voice for people in LA County, from Lancaster to Long Beach, advocating for people's right to access cannabis.
Yep.
And again, we get caught up in that cultural bubble where you think, oh, everyone has access, and that's not really true. You know, some of the data that I just mentioned shows that that's not true. So we're really about advocating for people's right to access this medicine and their opportunity to enjoy it. And for me, that's really important. And essentially what I do is make more work for other people on the board, because my job is to make relationships and outreach. Okay, now you guys go, make this work.
Yes, I know a little something about that as well. But yes, I mean, it's obviously at Wrazel, we're big fans of NORML, as well as OC NORML, who we know well, and now LA NORML, which we knew you guys prior, and I was really happy to hear that you guys were putting it together, because it's just so important to have strong advocacy groups like that to really, really push out the messages that those that we're trying to convey via those stories that you're telling. So speaking of which, I know you can find out information about LA NORML by going to LA NORML.
LANORML.org. .org. And we're also on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter as well, and Instagram. So,
excellent. And now let's tell people also where they can find you and Got a Story. So Got a Story Media can be found at gotastory.com. That's GOTTASTORY.com. Well, excellent. Philip, always a pleasure to talk to you. I look forward to doing it again sometime soon. Everybody, please reach out to Philip if you've got some content needs, or if you're just kind of curious about how to make your informational, educational content pop a little bit more, to appeal a little bit more to an audience that you're trying to target. Please hit him up. He's an amazing, amazing professional. Definitely. Thank you. My pleasure. And on top of that, I look forward to having him on again soon. Philip, always a pleasure. Be well, sir.
Thanks, man. It's a pleasure. Thanks, Brian.
You guys, take care.